Hello and welcome to episode 5 of CPCine, the Amstrad CPC video magazine. We are a little late this month because the heat wave here in the UK made my office far too hot to work in, and that's where all my CPC stuff was, so putting the show together has been a nightmare. Sorry about that, hopefully we'll be back to normal now however. This month, Amsword has finally launched, and we've tried to write this whole episode in that application just to see how well it works out. Coming up this month, we have all the news from November 1984, all the new CPC releases in November 1984, and the first Amstrad software charts from Popular Computing Weekly. Plus, we'll take a look at Dr. Logo. I try my hand at CPC ports of Colossal Caves, that stalwart of the text adventure genre, when I compare Abersoft's classic adventure to Level 9's Colossal adventure. We type in Kingdoms from issue 2 of Amstrad's CPC 464 user magazine. We take a look at CPM on the CPC, Laserboy brings us right up to the modern day, the demo reviews make a welcome return as we take a look at Facehugger's ultimate Megademo, and we'll round things off with a look at Amsword. So let's begin. The biggest Amstrad news in November 1984 was, of course, the launch of the DDI-1 disk drive. This amazing piece of kit would revolutionize coding on the CPC, which is great news for games and application developers, and for the home user, it meant not having to wait 10 minutes for something to load before you could use it, which I think we can all agree is a huge benefit. I remember being incredibly pleased when I finally picked up a second-hand disk drive along with a DK-Tronic 64K memory expansion block and a Tallkey CPC in 1990. It literally changed everything about my computing life, making games load quicker and letting me get into programming without using up a significant portion of my limited free time just loading and saving things. No doubt any of you who bought a disk drive back in the day will feel similar. ACU magazine is saying they don't expect the majority of customers to actually get their hands on a DDI-1 until December, but at least the stock is finally starting to arrive. After Amstrad has been using disk drives to showcase CPC software at trade fairs for months now, I think we all know people are clamouring for these things. After all, they've seen how well they work in the press. An entrepreneuring programmer that ACU calls Paul Ayton has landed a plum publishing contract with Amsoft. He coded a fruit machine simulator called Jackpot, and ACU tells us it will be released in November 1984. The funny thing is, though, it wasn't. Jackpot does not appear in any Amsoft catalogue that I could get my hands on at least, and that title doesn't exist anywhere on lists of Amsoft releases on the internet. Fruit Machine, which everyone who owns a CPC will likely have become familiar with at some point in their computing lives, did get released by Amsoft, and who was the coder of that game? One Paul Aitman. Now, I think we can all understand a game getting a different title before its release, but you don't often see that happening with the programmer. Who spelt Paul's name correctly, the game or the magazine? I'll let you decide that one. Moving over to Popular Computing Weekly, and we have news of the arrival of the machine that will finally kill off the mighty 8-bit computing scene. Commodore have announced the launch of the Amiga. Now, we all know the impact of the Amiga won't be properly felt until the late 80s when the Amiga 500 comes bundled with games that people actually want to play, and the first line of Amigas won't land on store shelves until the middle of 1985, but it is interesting to see that the line which will eventually cause the CPC to die off is already lurking in the background so soon after Amstrad's machine has arrived. Meanwhile, Sinclair have announced a battery-operated portable Spectrum that will run software via a microdrive. More news on that one if it ever actually arrives. Similarly, a second model QL is also in the works, but we all know what will happen to that. Hackers have broken into Prestel, one of the many online services in the pre-web days. They managed to get into the personal files of Prince Philip, who was apparently a Prestel user, and also vandalized the Financial Times Stock Exchange news service where they altered the information to suggest that the pound was worth $50. Apparently, idiots hacking things for no real purpose is clearly not a new thing. The 8th of November issue of PCW also contains an interesting letter about a bug in the CPC's BASIC. Apparently, you can cause all kinds of problems with a simple rem statement in your code. If you type 10 rem and then press the tab key, the CPC will insert an arrow symbol and then refuse to run anything because it says that there's a syntax error on line 32,511. Moreover, you can cause everything in the program to be deleted by adding this rem statement on a line of its own anywhere in your code. If you then run the line with the rem statement on it, everything after that line will be erased from memory. That's actually a pretty interesting trick if you've got a lot of code that you find you don't need. Just get rid of it that way. PCW also have some bad news for CPM enthusiasts in their 15th of November issue, where they run the headline "Problems for Amstrad CPM" and include a quote from Chris Hall of Locomotive Software to back up the bad news. As it turns out, CPM on the CPC 464, or CPC 646 as PCW calls it, have they had early news of an upcoming sister machine, or is this just an interesting spelling error? For apparently, the CPM on these machines leaves only 39.5k of memory free on the base machine, although the manual for the DTI-1 states that it's 39.75k. How much RAM does an average CPM program need to run? That would be 40k. Whoops. Well done, Amstrad. So close, and yet so incompatible. Amsoft's William Pohl was on full damage control duty after the PCW ran this headline, with 2 letters to the magazine in November, both of them robustly defending Amstrad's decision on CPM while downplaying the problems of memory overheads. While I was never a big CPM user, I have to admit that not being able to run programs not specifically written for the CPC wasn't exactly a huge problem for me, since there were CPC versions of everything that I ever wanted, and as we already seen with CPM Assembler and Pascal applications, it wasn't like we were going to be short of choice. Pohl kept referring to the low cost of Amstrad CPM compared to other options, and the correspondingly low cost of CPC CPM programs. I have to admit that this is a very good point. You can't expect everything for a lower price after all, and there's always a memory expansion block for those of you who want to be able to run those programs that are not directly coded for the CPC when you use CPM. You pay your money, you take your choice, as the saying goes. It's also worth noting that although PCW have been critical of the memory issue for Amstrad CPM, their own review of the CPC disk drive in their 29th of November issue actually downplays the problem significantly. In their words, this is not as serious a drawback as it might seem. The whole point of CPM is that portions of programs and most of the data is held on disk and overlaid into RAM when required. Some programs will need to be altered, which, while not a layman's job, should not be a major task. So there you are. Christmas sales figures for the start of the present buying season are not looking good according to Popular Computing Weekly. This won't bode well for Amstrad's competitors, although most of us already know that Amstrad will come out of this just fine because unbeknownst to the media, it's selling all of its CPCs in Europe rather than relying mainly on the UK. And before we move on from the news, I'd just like to take a moment to appreciate this advert on page 13 of the official magazine, which is offering knitted woolen jumpers of your favourite Amstrad characters. Did anyone ever take this person up on the offer of a knitted jumper? If so, please do get in touch, because I would love to see some of the photos of the finished product. CPC knitwear, so 80s. As Christmas nears, software houses have started churning out loads of titles in the hope of getting them under some trees this December. There's a little something for everyone too, with games, an educational title, and a few serious applications. Let's take a look at them. For game enthusiasts, we have a plethora of new titles. Return to Eden, another science fiction adventure game from Level 9 Games. Football Manager, a game that I'm not sure is quite as balanced and realistic as I remember it being. Popular Computing listed Flight Path 737 as coming out this month, even though it's already out and already reviewed in other magazines, so there's that one as well. We have an interesting fantasy adventure, The Royal Quest, which has a nicely drawn parchment as its screen layout. I like that. Weird graphic adventure game Pyjamarama, which so many people seem to love, but which I've never really understood. Infuriatingly difficult arcade puzzle game Rollerball, which I spent far too much time playing while putting this section of the show together. An absurdly named Othello game called The Moors Challenge, which is actually really fun to play, despite its stupid title. The Forest at World's End, an adventure game that I got stuck in immediately because apparently there's a door you can open, but you can't enter it. I don't know what's going on there. A really nice Qbert clone called Urbert, a fiendishly difficult Manic Miner clone called Blagger, and a rather interesting real estate strategy game called Country Cottages, which we may have to take a look at in a later episode. Those of us who were subjected to educational software were thankfully short on new entries this month, since all we got was Number Painter, an educational mathematics game that's actually fiendish with the length of its questions on higher levels. Fun though, and nice animations too, while those of us who are serious users got some serious bang for their serious buck with Grasp, which I initially believed to be a drawing package, but which is actually a utility for displaying data in graph form. Quite useful if you need that kind of thing. Amsword, which we'll be taking a more thorough look at later in this episode. Zedis, a machine code editor and disassembler that I couldn't find a copy of, but could find a Spanish copy of Zedis too, and apparently that's also from 1984, so are these the same program? I can't tell you because I don't speak Spanish, and therefore can't read the manual. Speedmaster, an application for producing high-speed tape saves. Again, quite a useful utility if you want to make your software load more quickly. My old graphic adventure creator adventure games would have benefited from that immensely. And finally, LinkWord, a set of 4 programs for teaching French, Italian, Spanish and German. Maybe we should take a more in-depth look at these in a future episode. What do you think? All in all, I think we can all agree that this is not a bad set of releases. There's definitely something for everyone here, and that is a big plus. Sadly, there are also several missing games to add to the list. Popular Computing lists several new releases by James R. Payton, but I can find no copies of these programs online. Arcade racing game Turbo Driver, adventure game 52nd Street, and arcade game Zoodak Attack are all by Mr. Payton, and I can't find copies of them anywhere. And in addition, adventure game The Holy Grail from Terrysoft appears to also be missing. Does anyone have a copy of any of these games? I would love to hear from you if you do. By the end of November 1984, the Amstrad CPC has established itself well enough that there are some charts beginning to appear. These first charts are brought to us by Popular Computing Weekly and apparently compiled by Boots, despite letters to PCW telling us that Boots hasn't a clue about the Amstrad CPC. At this early stage in the computer's life, there are few options if we want to know what's hot and what's not, so let's take what we have and jump into something better when it finally comes along. At number 10 we have Amsoft's Chess. Monster Chase from Romic comes in at number 9. Roland in the Caves drops in at number 8. Despite only just getting released, Return to Eden by Level 9 is already in the charts at number 7. Codename Matt, which I was very pleasantly surprised with when we reviewed it in episode 3, slips in at number 6. There's another new release at number 5, it's Forest at World's End from Interceptor. The brilliant Star Commando takes 4th position. Word Processor by Amstrad is apparently number 3. What is this? Is it easy Amsword, or full-blown Amsword, or something else? It's no wonder people complained about these charts. Micropower's Ghouls, another title that we reviewed just last episode, takes the number 2 spot, and Harrier Attack sits proudly at number 1. I think we can all agree that is a good choice for the top spot. Educational software isn't always great. In fact, it mostly sucks, let's be honest. But there is one educational program that's pretty good. Dr. Logo, or DR Logo since it's from Digital Research, the weird programming language that allows you to take a turtle and draw lines with it, is something that I first encountered on the reverse side of the CP/M disc that came with my DDI-1, although I later returned to it briefly during my IT lessons at school. At first glance, Logo is a fun drawing tool. You can move a pen, either on screen or using the turtle attached to your computer, which would receive commands via a cable in a similar manner to how a plotter works today. Simple commands are sent to the turtle to tell it how to move and whether to drag a pen along the paper underneath it while it moves. Commands begin rather simply. There's PU, short for pen up, to lift the pen off the paper, and PD, short for pen down, to place the pen back down on the paper. You turn the turtle using RT and LT to turn the turtle right and left respectively, while FD will move the turtle forward. It's all very simple, at least at first. The important thing to remember is that Logo isn't just for drawing pretty pictures with your computer, it's a programming language. To that end, there are variables, logical expressions, the ability to create loops, and logical operations amongst other things. As with BASIC, it's possible to write code either one line at a time, as I'm doing on screen right now, or to create a full program and then run it, even including variables in the program that are defined at the time that you run it. The manual has several examples of this, the simplest being the triangle program example, where the length of each side of the triangle is determined by a variable that is defined at the point that the program is run. Variables are defined in an odd way in Logo. I've never seen anything defined in this manner before. To indicate that something is a variable in Logo, you stick a colon on the front of it. So a variable called length, to continue with the triangle example, would be written as :length in Logo. It's an odd method, but it does work. You can do a lot with variables in Logo, just as you can with many other programming languages. Simple multiplication, addition, subtraction, all of those are of course possible, but you can also set up booleans, print the content of a variable to screen, and use trigonometric functions like sine, cosine, and tangent. Basically anything you might need to do visually and mathematically, you can do it in Logo. Very useful and very much like turning your CPC into a graphing calculator. As with Pascal, which we took a look at in a previous episode, Logo requires a program to be defined with a name at the start, so it can be called or run by that name later. While Pascal defines a program using program followed by the name of the program, Logo instead uses to, as in to triangle. It's easy to remember this as you explaining to Logo how to do something, in this case, how to triangle. Logo also follows Pascal's example by requiring you to enter end on the final line to let the software know that you have finished the program. It's all very neat and tidy. I have to admit that I actually rather like Logo. It's a fun language with admittedly limited uses, but within those uses, it's really neat and very efficient. I enjoy dropping into it from time to time to make a few doodles. It's how I used the program back in my childhood, and I can't see myself falling out of love with it anytime soon. Two versions of the famous adventure game Colossal Caves, written for mainframe computers back in the 70s, have landed on the Amstrad CPC. The first, Classic Adventure, was written by Abersoft and published by Amsoft. The other was the first CPC game from Level 9, a text adventure company that would go on to rival the American Infocom in terms of the depth and complexity of their games, although sadly they wouldn't quite reach that level of cult reverence. I want to look at both of these games today to compare and contrast them. Since Colossal Adventure is a larger and more enhanced version of the original game, we're going to start with the closer analogue to the original. Let's begin with Classic Adventure. 1984's Classic Adventure is a nicely contrasted text adventure game that is clearly designed to work well on both green and colour monitors, which makes a lot of sense given the type of game it is. Text adventures always work really well on green screens. The manual makes it clear that this game is designed very much like later books on coding adventures in BASIC would always suggest that you do. To save on memory and coding, the game only checks the first 4 letters of any command that you type. This means that instead of typing examine, you can just type exam. Later games would also allow this quite a lot of the time, even though the commands became much more complex. It's all an ingenious method of making the typing quicker for the user while also saving on much needed bytes of memory. Sadly, this is a very early adventure game, so there are some issues that anyone coming to it from later games will have to learn to work around. You can't examine most things in the game. The nouns in the room descriptions will usually not have descriptions of their own, so good luck examining the building that you start near, for example. I also tried to walk north from the starting point, and that seemed to work, but only if you walked quickly enough. If you took your time, you would somehow find that the game had looped you back to the outside of the building, even if you had walked off down the road. I have no idea why that happened. The purpose of the game is to locate all the treasures and return them to the building. You start the game outside the building that you'll need to deposit the treasures in, which is useful, but that's just about all the hint that you're getting. These old games don't mess about, they dump you right into things without a care for your safety. Getting into the game isn't too difficult actually. You type the commands that you want to execute in the game, things like get food, play flute, etc. Sometimes the game will tell you that you can't do something, but if you try again with different words, perhaps it'll be okay. Once you get to grips with the right words, you'll be fine. Although I will admit that I never got used to not simply being able to type L to look. That's something that comes in later games. I had to try and keep remembering that this is a very early example, and it frustrated me nevertheless. It's just one of those things. Sometimes when you go back to the old games, it's not really the same as when you're experiencing them for the first time. The game has some ridiculous shortcuts in it as well, such as the time when I exited a hall by typing down, but then reappeared in the hall by typing east from the location where down took me. At first I couldn't get my head around it, because typing west from the hall took me to a completely different location to where down took me, until I finally pictured my location in my head. The steps that I went down were leading west at the same time, so west was taking me to the top of a fissure that the stairs will lead me down into. The descriptions did not make that clear at all. It's just one of those little problems that very early text adventures have. You have to be able to picture everything in your head as well as what's on screen. The puzzles themselves in Classic Adventure aren't bad once you get to grips with the game's parser. For those of you who aren't familiar, that's the term in adventure gaming for the recognised word list and how you use the commands. The parser is limited, and not everyone will enjoy this kind of sedentary game, I'll grant you that, but overall, it's actually a really decent implementation of the game. My only lasting criticism is the magic spell. It should be XYZZY, ZZ, but because the game is strict, looking for 4-letter commands, that classic spell has been shortened to XYZY, ZZ. You wouldn't be allowed to get away with stuff like that these days. Gaming purists would be all over you, like a ton of bricks. But apart from that, this is a really good implementation of the game, and I enjoyed my time playing it. Now let's move on to Colossal Adventure. I mentioned earlier that Level 9 should be ranked up there with Infocom, so it's interesting to see that both got their start with a game based on Colossal Caves. Level 9 brought us Colossal Adventure, their enhanced take on Colossal Caves, while Infocom modified that classic adventure to give us Zork. Two very different interpretations of a classic, but both giving rise to highly respected adventure game companies. It's interesting when history brings us those parallels, isn't it? Anyway, let's take a look at the game. The first thing that we'll see is that Level 9 didn't screw around with the enhancements. This is the first in what became their Middle-earth trilogy, and they really did want to make their mark with this game. There's enhanced text, there are more locations, the magic spell is properly spelled, and more. There's even a nice short introductory story in the manual to give you some background to the game. I like that. Many of the items from the original Colossal Caves are in their traditional locations, but several are not. The treasures are some of those. This makes playing Colossal Adventure straight after playing Classic Adventure much less of a chore, but the experience is still soured a fair amount by the atrocious choice of font. I really don't like what they've gone for here. They should have used the standard CPC font, or at least something as equally readable as that font. I get the old world handwriting style that they're going for, I just think it makes it an awful lot harder to read. Maybe that's just me, perhaps you like it, but I didn't, and I didn't back when the CPC was my main computer. On the plus side, the enhancements they've made to the game are very much welcome. This is a huge game, and Level 9 have made it very much their own baby, thanks to much nicer descriptions and the way that they've given everything a few tweaks here and there. The parser is more enhanced, although it still can't cope with the shorthands such as I for inventory or L for look, which is a big shame. Still, it's an excellent starting point. So which of these games is better? Well, it's difficult to say. Classic Adventure feels an awful lot more like it's a true rendition of the original game, so purists will love it for that. On the other hand, Colossal Adventure has put a lot more meat on the bones of the original game, and adventure game aficionados will love it for that. It really comes down to what you're looking for in a game. For me, however, Level 9 edges it just slightly despite that awful font choice because I appreciate the extras that have gone into it to make it a new and unique game all of its own. Kingdoms is a big game for a type-in, something that wasn't all that uncommon for the official Amstrad magazine. Amstrad Action may have been the more popular title once it launched, but Amstrad Computer User always tried to give you a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak. This type-in, the second large feature type-in from issue 2, was no exception. Once again, represented with a complete mess of a design, however. This text is really difficult to read, with that gaudy coat of arms behind it. Nevertheless, if you struggle on, you are presented with a pretty interesting text-based strategy game. The on-screen instructions explain the situation quite well. You have taken control of a simple economy of a small empire, although how any empire's economy could be described as simple is stretching the imagination. I'm no expert in economics, but I'm pretty sure that once you go beyond a small basic business, no economy can legitimately be described as simple. Still, this is the situation that we find ourselves in, so let's see what we have to work with. Okay, That's not a simple economy, that's farming, and I'm pretty sure it's weird farming too. Not using land makes it barren? That's... well, it's different, let's put it that way. Maybe this empire is just somewhere that causes unused land to get worse rather than better, or maybe the coder just didn't know what they were talking about. Either way, let's leave that oddness aside and get into the game proper. How does it play? To be honest, it's a basic mathematics problem, but with a significant twist. You will rarely produce enough of a harvest to keep your warehouses stocked to the same level as you started with over the course of the game. This is because of the random number generator and its effect on harvest yields. At its core, this game is very simple. You need to plant 10 times the number of sacks of corn that you have acres of land to farm. You then need to use up 6 times the number of sacks of corn as you have members of your population. So your inputs for each round are very simple. Multiply the amount of land by 10 and multiply the amount of people by 6. Although, I have to admit, I did just round that up to a round number since there's no apparent downside to people getting a little bit too much to eat. Inputting numbers is the entire extent of your contribution to the game, and it's a very short game to play, although it wasn't quite so short to type in. This is 5k when saved on disk, and you can get through to the end of the game in about 4 minutes. It's not bad for a type in, but there is a vast potential here to add extra levels of complexity and gameplay, and also to fix the random number generator because, let's face it, if you're putting in all of the effort and doing exactly what the game says, and then you just keep getting less back than you should, there may be something that needs tweaking there. But in the end, it's a type-in. You can modify these things if you want, and perhaps that's a project that someone might like to take up. Personally, I'd love to see what enhancements people can come up with for this rather interesting game. In the early 80s, CP/M ruled the roost. Prior to the ascendancy of the IBM PC as a small business and home office computer of choice, most people who were running their own businesses used a system with CP/M on it, and its legacy is felt even today, with command line interfaces on everything from the Windows 10 command prompt through to the core of the Linux system that you're streaming this video from. They're all based on CP/M. Amstrad didn't want to limit their computers to kids' bedrooms. They knew the CPC was a capable and sturdy machine that could run a home office or a small business, but to do that they needed 2 things: far faster loading times and CP/M compatibility. Cue the introduction of disk drives bundled with CP/M 2.2 and, with the introduction of the more powerful CPC 6128, CP/M 3.0, also known as CP/M+. CP/M is an interesting cross-platform operating system that manages to keep its compatibility going on different machines by taking an approach to computing that Linux would later use as well. The operating system is split into 3 parts. A console command processor, or CCP, which is the part of CP/M that handles what the user inputs into the system. The disk operating system, also known as CP/M Basic Disk Operating System, or BDOS, which is a series of function calls programs can make to access the disk drive, the memory, and other computer functions that are controlled by CP/M. And the input-output system, known as the CP/M Basic Input-Output System, or BIOS, which is the platform-specific part of CP/M. The BIOS is the only part of CP/M that isn't written by Digital Research, the operating system's creators, but is instead written by the computer manufacturer in order to make CP/M function on that computer. In our case, Amstrad wrote the CP/M BIOS for the CPC. In comparison to other operating systems that you may be familiar with, CP/M is a monolithic kernel operating system in a similar vein to MS-DOS and Linux. This means, basically, the entire computer is controlled by the operating system, with all function calls and the input-output system going through the kernel, the program that controls the computer. That has its advantages and its disadvantages, but it's a topic that's mostly outside of what we're aiming for in this feature. For our purposes, it's useful to know that CP/M, DOS, and Linux all share this way of working, so if you're familiar with how one of them works, you should be able to get to grips with the others relatively quickly. There were many programs written for CP/M on the CPC, and many books able to help you get to grips with its operating system. Those are definitely worth taking a look at, by the way, because CP/M is a very different beast to AMS-DOS and to the basic ready prompt that CPC users would be familiar with up to this point. If you're new to CP/M, I recommend your first port of call is the CP/M primer in Chapter 3 of the DDI1 manual, or the equivalent in your CPC 664 or 6128 manual for those computers. Read it, play around with CP/M a bit, and then move back to the other books and programs once you feel more comfortable. I'm serious about this. Don't do what I did when I was a kid and just jump into it without learning the basics, otherwise you too could end up accidentally formatting your CP/M disk. Those things cost a bit to replace, and it turns out that Amstrad didn't keep copies of CP/M 2.2 after a few years. When I bought my replacement disk from them, they sent me CP/M Plus instead. Now, I'm not going to argue because it's a decent program, but it's not exactly what I was expecting. You can boot CP/M on your CPC by inserting the CP/M disk and using the bar CP/M command. This issues an instruction to the CP/M ROM inside the DDI1 interface, or inside your 664 or 6128 if you're using those computers, to begin the boot process. CP/M is not fully contained on the CP/M disks. Part of it is inside your computer, which is a useful point to note if you're trying to run a CP/M disk from a DDI1 clone that doesn't include the CP/M ROM, and you can't work out why it won't work. Once booted, you come face to face with the command line. From here, you can operate the computer just like you could any other CP/M-based system. There are CP/M games, business applications, programming environments, basically anything you could ever need to use on your computer. It's fast, it's efficient, and it's effective. For my part, I was never a big user of CP/M back when the CPC was my main computer. This is mostly because I never had a lot of CP/M programs compared to my standard Amstrad software. I wrote games in GAC, often Amstrad Action Cover Tape, or in BASIC. I didn't boot up CP/M, then boot up something else. Nevertheless, I did play around with CP/M because it was there, and I don't remember it being all that off-putting despite it having a very different look and feel. CP/M will be more familiar to users of Amstrad's PCW, to be honest. That system used CP/M as its backbone, so anyone who booted up LocoScript to write a letter or the next novel will be more familiar with CP/M than the average CPC user. That said, several of us Arnold fans will remember a few of our disk-based games did have to be loaded using bar CP/M rather than the standard run command. Why is that? Because they used system-formatted disks with a custom bootloader in order to get themselves up and running. CP/M offered some excellent disk access routines, which a few programs that only loaded part of their code at any time could definitely take advantage of if the programmer knew what they were doing. In fact, when we take a look at Facehugger's Ultimate Megademo later in this episode, we'll see one example of a program doing just that. Another example I remember from back in the days is Infocom's famous text adventure Zork, although I am happy to be corrected if it turns out that Zork and other Infocom games aren't actually using CP/M for its disk access routines, but are instead only running in CP/M because it made them easier to port over to the CPC. All in all, CP/M for the CPC is far more versatile than the doom-mongering Impersonal Computing magazine would at first have had you believe. There's a lot of software out there for the CPC under CP/M, and it's powerful stuff. While it's mostly there for the serious users, as you might expect, there is still something of interest to the average Amstrad user here, so it could be worth digging out that dusty old disk that came with your DDI1 or disk-based CPC to give it a look. I am very much of the opinion that if modern Amstrad games had been available back in the 80s, the Spectrum and Commodore 64 would have been blown out of the water. Laser Boy is one example of a modern game that would have topped the charts and dropped the jaws of anyone who came across it. In essence, it's a CPC rendition of the popular Xbox Live Arcade game Super Meat Boy. You play a small character who has to navigate a series of fiendish locations where most of the features in each location will kill you on contact. It's a fast-paced action puzzle game that you'll want to play more and more once you start with it. Laser Boy is a fast-paced game, and I really do mean fast. The controls are super responsive, and many deaths of your poor, long-suffering protagonist will come at the hands of holding down a direction key a tenth of a second too long. There is no music, but to be honest, you'll probably not notice that after the first level or two, because you'll be too busy hearing the death sound effect for the 1000th time, or the jump sound effect. Your goal in the game is to get from your starting point to the exit without dying. It sounds simple, but it's really not. Some of these levels are pretty easy, but the rest are downright devious. Safe zones are few and far between, and you'll find yourself dying more times than Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. Despite that, it's a really fun game to play. Graphically, this game is very simple. The whole thing is minimalist, and it works so well as a result. Your little laser boy sprite is nice, and it's clear what everything is, but the backgrounds are all black and the levels are constructed out of lines. I didn't mind any of this, and I doubt that you will either, because once you get into the game, you won't be looking at the graphics. You'll be concentrating on getting past the fiendishly difficult puzzles. Each one has a solution, however, so don't fret about that. This game can be finished. You probably won't finish it, but you could if you spent enough time on it. I didn't finish it, and I don't mind that. I love a game where there's always something more that I can come back to later, and come back I will. This kind of game is right up my alley. I love it. Carlos Sevilla submitted this to the CPC Retro Dev contest in 2017, and I have to say, I thought it was a strong contender to win the contest. It's an amazing game, especially if you enjoy damn hard action puzzlers. Give it a try, but make sure that you have a lot of free time, because I have a feeling that you'll get sucked into this one. We haven't had a demo review for several episodes now, so I thought it was time to remedy that and take a look at the first demo that truly blew my mind as an Amstrad user. This is Facehugger's Ultimate Megademo. Quite a bold title there, I think you'll agree. Can it live up to that title? In a word, absolutely. This demo features some of the best CPC music I had ever heard when I first loaded it up after getting my copy from a PD library along with a copy of Eve of Shadows, a game that we will almost definitely be covering in a future episode. The graphics were amazing for the time as well, with shapes generated in real time and animated in a way that made them feel so very alive compared to what I was used to at this point in my computing life. I can't say everything in this demo is unique, because it's not. It's usually not even the first time these techniques have been seen in demos, but that's not the point of the Ultimate Megademo. The point is that it's all being done in one demo, and it's also the way it's all being done. As Facehugger himself explains in one of the later sections, the demo takes up an entire side of a 3-inch floppy disk. It's a huge demo. It's also very cleverly written, because it's a multi-loader that's using the disk to store all of the parts of the demo that it's not currently using, which is something that you see in games, when not something you usually see in other programs. While you will most clearly see this happening between sections, where the demo displays a loading page, it also happens during some sections. Most notable is the CPC multi-ball section, where the shapes will be loaded in during the running of that section. The demo keeps going while the shapes load. It's very impressive. The demo is doing this by employing CP/M's system format, which allows a portion of the disk to be given over to a bootloader that can call other sections of the disk into memory as and when required. By using CP/M in this way, the demo is also able to take advantage of the CP/M ROM to work as a controller for loading the other parts of the demo on an as-needed basis. At least, that seems to be what's going on here from an outsider's perspective. If that's not the case, I would be very happy to hear from someone who knows how this was all achieved. Please do let me know in the comments. Each section of the demo can be accessed individually by holding down the numbers 1 to 9 while the start of the demo loads, although you won't find that out until you've read the text in the final part. In that way, it's like the 30 Years Megademo that we featured in episode 1, only here each section autoplays rather than returns you to the menu once it's done. Now, I could go on all day about the wonderful graphical tricks that are on show in this demo. Everything from the real-time 3D renders to the Amiga graphics running at a higher definition with more colours on Mode 2, and other modes if you'll recall the brilliant intro rasters, that should technically be possible on the Amstrad. The main things I want to focus on, however, are the sound and the video. Facehugger has put an awful lot of effort into running music for this demo that pushes the CPC's internal speaker well past what it's actually capable of producing. Yes, I know a lot of the music is taken from various commercial games rather than written for this demo, some of the games actually being Amiga games by the way, but the point still stands. To hear the demo properly, you need to use the headphone jack. The demo is in stereo, and it also includes a lovely bass line that the internal speaker simply can't reproduce. If you're using a stereo SCART output cable on your CPC, you will be able to appreciate this demo properly, because you'll no doubt be hearing the sound from the headphone output rather than the internal speaker. That is the best way to listen to it, I assure you. It's also worth noting that if you watch the section with the Running Man demo, you won't be able to hear the speech properly without using the headphone jack. Yes, this demo contains both a video and speech that you can clearly understand if you're using it in the right way. On an Amstrad CPC in the early 90s. Now, we've heard speech in Amstrad games by this point. It wasn't great, but it was immensely compressed and featured a lot of signal degradation. We've also heard reasonable speech via a speech synthesizer unit. This demo manages to combine the quality of the speech synthesizer without the need for the hardware, and that is impressive in and of itself. The video in the demo is very limited. It's a few frames of animation that loops again and again, but that's not the point. What we're seeing here is digitized video on an Amstrad without any hardware expansion. It may be a small amount of video, but it's here, and that, to me, is quite frankly amazing, especially when in the final text on the demo, Facehugger basically reveals that the video is grabbed from an Amiga, like some of the earlier images in the demo. Basically, this demo is one huge case of anything the Amiga can do, the CPC can do as well. And I'm all for that, quite frankly. The full demo is just under 70 minutes long, and I highly recommend you give it a watch, although I am aware that Part 2 or perhaps Part 3 will crash a CPC Plus. I don't know why it does that, but just remember, this demo doesn't seem to be fully compatible with the CPC Plus. So bear that in mind, and if you don't have a copy available to run on your CPC, or you're trying to run it on CPC Plus and it's not working, just be aware that it does work rather well in most emulators, and there are several copies of the full thing on YouTube. In fact, I recorded my own copy using my video capture system so I could include footage of the demo running on a real CPC for this episode. And I've uploaded the full unedited version along with this episode, so you can take a look at that if you fancy seeing it. The link is in the description bar. All in all, Facehugger's Ultimate Megademo is definitely worthy of the claim that it makes in its title. Before this demo, I'd never seen anything quite this amazing, and it was many years before another demo would knock my socks off quite like this one did. If it sounds like I'm gushing over this one, it's because seeing this demo for the first time is one of my cherished CPC memories. It's definitely one demo that you really should run on your CPC at least once. Initially selling for $19.95 at a time when most software cost around £7 to £10, Amsword was clearly placed as one of the CPC's premier titles. It started out as something of a port of the Spectrum Taskword 2, but it quickly inflated into something that was far more powerful. Amsword is a beast of a word processor. Popular Computing Weekly described it as close to rivaling WordStar in sophistication, and to be honest, I have to agree. I never liked Easy Amsword, I'm going to just admit that straight off. So when I kept seeing Amsword being touted about in magazines, I didn't pay it much heed. How could it be worth my time if the previous version was so poor? Well, I have to say I was wrong to dismiss it. This program is great. Using it to write in 2018 is not a bad experience, truth be told. It's easily as responsive when typing as my modern word processor software. In some cases, such as when I'm writing on my phone, it's actually more responsive, although that could easily be down to the bloated modern programming. Either way, Amsword is fast and efficient. The text is sharp on the screen, and it's a nice choice to have white on black for the display, which eases the potential eye strain that I could easily see seeping in if anyone was using this to write long documents, such as this episode, and oh my goodness, it's a long one this month. If you don't like the colours though, it is possible to change them to something that's more preferable, so that's an option. In many ways, Amsword reminds me of something like Emacs, which Linux and Unix users will be very familiar with. A very nice editor program that prefers a wide variety of keyboard combinations in order to issue commands. Where some programs would have employed a menu bar for commands, and yes, those did exist on the CPC, take a look at the music system for a very nice example of a menu bar on an Amstrad. Amsword instead prefers to employ so many key combinations that you have to keep referring to the manual to find out how to do basic word processing. Well, at least at first. You'll soon find these combinations get memorized as you use the program, which is only to be expected, so don't be put off. But that's not to say that there aren't downsides to Amsword. I wouldn't use it as my main word processor nowadays because the problems get in the way, and it's difficult to take anything out of Amsword anymore since printer ribbons aren't as easy to come by these days, and to be honest with you, neither are working printers, but that's a topic for a different episode. And also, I make a lot of use of the insert ability when I'm writing, and Amsword doesn't implement that very well. Inserting is possible in Amsword, it's just really clunky. In a modern word processor, I can simply move to wherever in the document I want to add something, and then start typing. the program will automatically move everything after the cursor to make room for what I'm adding in, unless I turn that function off. If I try that in Amsword, I will overwrite everything after the cursor. You have to turn the insert function on. It's off by default. Now this does have the advantage of preventing the program from slowing down because inserting extra characters means reformatting everything that's on the screen, and that takes time on an 8-bit machine. So I can absolutely see why they chose to go down this route. Nevertheless, it is possible to insert characters, it's just that you do it by inserting a space for every single character when you input the command for the first time, then inserting a new line every time you use the insert command after that until you stop pressing it. In other words, it's not the insert command as we know and love today, but once again, I can absolutely see why they did it this way. By inserting a single character on the first key press, Amsword is giving you room to put in a character that you may have missed when typing, such as changing no to not, or something similar, basically a small typo correction. If you need to do a more substantial correction, it's far more efficient to throw an entire blank line into the document because it means reformatting the entire document just the once. That keeps Amsword fast and efficient. And let's face it, you can delete the extra spaces that it generates once you've finished adding in everything that you wanted to add. It's cumbersome in some ways and efficient in others. And isn't that the Amstrad CPC in a nutshell? Speaking of efficiency, there's a find and replace function in Amsword, and I was not expecting to see that. I always viewed this as a rather advanced feature for a word processor. After all, it wasn't even in some text editors that I used at the start of my PC computing days. So it's brilliant to see it here. Okay, sure, it's limited to finding and replacing a single word at a time, because if you put in multiple words and use spaces, it just won't work. But it is here, and it does the job, so that is pretty cool. Colour me impressed. All in all, Amsword is a surprisingly powerful word processor, especially for the time, and even more so because it's a sequel to a program that, let's face it, was quickly overtaken by basic type-ins from just about every single magazine going. The range of functions available are brilliant, and I would not have minded using this for my homework back in my school days. I'm glad we've got more versatile software now, but if we hadn't moved on from this, I'm surprised to say that I don't think it would have been too much of a burden. Okay, that's all we've really got time for this month. This has been a very long time coming, and in the end we've gone over the time that I would normally want these episodes to run to, but there was a lot to cover, so I think we can let it slide for this time. In the next episode, the CPC will be celebrating its first Christmas, so that should be interesting. I hope you'll join me for that, because it's shaping up to be a fun one. So, until next time, happy Amstrad computing, and I'll see you later.